which came after undocking by the spacecraft from the Rosviet module. The events that transpired throughout the course of the 56-minute descent from the deorbit burn tripped off in excellent fashion, with the spacecraft touching down and then being pulled over onto its side by its parachute. Not uncommon, very typical. The weather conditions a bit challenging for the search and recovery forces as they flew from the staging city of Kustanai, still en route to the landing site itself. Some of the helicopters are now already on the ground as they begin the process of working to extract the crew. We're hoping to receive video from the landing site very soon. The temperature is quite frosty, 23 degrees Fahrenheit at landing time, as the Soyuz descended under thick clouds and fog to reach the landing site itself. The Russian search and recovery forces are beginning to attend to the Soyuz spacecraft that is on its side following its bullseye touchdown at the landing site some 53 miles to the northeast of Arkalyk. Landing occurring at 9:58 p.m. Central Time, just before 10 a.m. Kazakhstan time on Monday morning. Rather cold conditions, 23 degrees Fahrenheit, and thick clouds and fog that posed a challenge for the helicopters that were deployed out of the city of Kustanai in northern Kazakhstan. And again, we're standing by for a video from the landing site itself. This is Mission Control Houston. The initial helicopters on the ground, part of the Russian search and recovery forces, as we stand by for the transmission of video from the landing site. Everything proceeding in smooth order with the crew. And there's our first view of Soyuz commander Max Sarayev, who served as the Expedition 41 commander as well, having wrapped up his second flight into space at an aggregate total of 334 days in space on his 2 missions. As always, quite upbeat, flashing the V for victory sign, being attended by the first Russian medical personnel who were on the first helicopter down at the landing site. You can see patches of snow. Again, Max Sarayev, the Soyuz commander, first out of the vehicle, which touched down right on time at 9:58 and 35 seconds p.m. Central Time, just before 10 a.m. In Kazakhstan on Monday morning. You can see a brisk wind, patches of snow on the ground, temperatures hovering around the 23-degree Fahrenheit mark. The helicopters landing in sequential fashion. The other crew members to be extracted shortly, Reed Wiseman and Alexander Gerst, having wrapped up their first flights into space respectively, 165 days in all since they were launched with Sarayev from the Baikonur Cosmodrome on May 29th. A multinational crew returning home today, wrapping up their 5.5-month mission. Sarayev conducted one spacewalk during his time on orbit, a 3-hour, 38-minute excursion with Alexander Samokhutyaev that occurred late in the increment. That followed 2 U.S. spacewalks out of the Quest airlock in U.S. extravehicular mobility units. Reed Wiseman conducting 2 spacewalks, the first with Alexander Gerst, the second with Barry Wilmore, who now is on board the station, along with Elena Surova and Alexander Samokhutyaev, as a 3-person crew for the next 2 weeks until they are joined by the next trio of residents, who will be launched 2 weeks from today, U.S. time, in the wee hours of Monday, November 24th, that consisting of NASA flight engineer Terry Virts, who will become the commander of Expedition 43 next March. He'll be launched along with Soyuz commander Anton Shkaplerov and another European Space Agency flight engineer, Samantha Cristoforetti. While Max Sarayev is attended to, sitting passively in his chair next to his Soyuz capsule, the other crew members in the process of being extracted. This recovery operation executed in flawless fashion by the Rosaviatsa search and recovery forces, who have a knack of overcoming adverse conditions. In this case,
so have it taken
not the snow, but it was a case of low clouds and fog that initially delayed the deployment of the helicopters from Kustanai, the staging city. Finally arriving on scene, they are still en route, landing in sequential fashion as part of the recovery operations underway.
Просто у меня здесь генератор, просто очень задевать его. А это на свой может.
This is all part of the routine initial medical tests that are performed by the Russian nurses and flight surgeons following the landing of a Soyuz vehicle. There are teams of NASA and European Space Agency personnel that are part of this recovery team, and they'll be attending to Reed Wiseman and Alexander Gerst here shortly after they're extracted from the Soyuz.
Ну пока почву нормально.
And Alexander Gerst of the European Space Agency. A German volcanologist who spent 5.5 months on board the International Space Station looking none the worse for wear.
I have one right here. What about yours?
This is a very, very important time for the European Space Agency. Gerst returning to Earth this evening. This is followed on Tuesday by the anticipated landing of the Philae lander from the Rosetta spacecraft on the comet that the mothership has been orbiting now for some time. And in 2 weeks, the launch of Samantha Cristoforetti, the Italian Air Force pilot who will be launched to the International Space Station for a 5.5-month mission of her own.
Аркалик Николаевич, я плохо вас слышал, но да, докладываю вам. Да, все хорошо, все.
Arkalyk Nikolaevich, I cannot hear very well, but I'm reporting everything is good. Understood. I tried calling you today all day and yesterday, but failed to reach you. I mean, yesterday actually. I cannot hear you.
Хорошо, спасибо, Николай, спасибо.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.
Спасибо, да. До свидания.
Thank you. Bye.
Мы ее провезли, видимо, на 15-м борту. Я что-то не развел.
A Soyuz landing day for the returning crew members is as much an endurance test as it is a test of technical prowess, an extremely long day. This began early Sunday morning when the crew woke up. They had a final meal together with the remaining crew members on board, Barry Wilmore, Alexander Samakutyaev, and Elena Surova.
It doesn't hurt anywhere.
Before they moved into final farewells and hatch closure, shortly after 3 p.m. Central Time, the preparations for undocking that occurred at 6:31 p.m. Central Time, and then the deorbit burn and the high-speed entry back into the Earth's atmosphere. And there is Reed Wiseman, the NASA flight engineer, home after 5.5 months in space.
That's what you call adrenaline. So force in your veins.
Naval Commander and test pilot Reed Wiseman, who became a worldwide sensation through social media during his time up on orbit, back seated next to his crewmates Max Sarayev and Alexander Gerst. On the right is his flight surgeon, Dr. Steve Hart.
So you've got water? Yes. Are you thirsty? A little bit. If that's all right. I can drink later. So what's the pressure for MCC?
Hey, dude.
And even we're just about to land directly, but because of the parachute, we ended on one side. Right? Other than that, everything is nominal. Would you like to say something to your family? Yes, here I am. Here we are on Earth. We'll soon be back home. But in fact, if I can elaborate a little bit, I can say that we've been left without some details on board the station, but we are hearing what's going on now, and here is a perfect example. Here have Germany and the US. They have worked together for half a year, completed our fine program. We've received a few cargo vehicles and space vehicles. Everything was fine, everything was in the spirit of cooperation. So I think that everybody needs to learn and follow the example of ISS crew members. Don't get insulted, don't try to prove anything to each other. Let's try and live together side by side. This is the most important thing, and then we'll have good results. Yeah, showing a good example. Thank you.
Max Sarayev providing his own commentary and assessment of his own expedition and a lesson in international cooperation, touting the cooperation that he and his crewmates, who had a special affection for one another and an affinity for spaceflight, a Russian Air Force colonel, Reed Wiseman there, a Navy commander test pilot, and a German scientist, a volcanologist, Alexander Gerst, now home back on Earth after 165 days in space.
Please hold it like this.
Yeah, we do, absolutely. Can you wait?
The interview, can we do that?
Yeah, definitely.
Кто не видит,
Добрый, это очень добрый.
Good morning.
Спасибо.
Что хотите сказать? Для сопровождения полета ваших подруг близких, которые видят вас в прямом эфире.
Мы с Алексом только что приземлились.
We've just landed.
Самый хороший, нет, по-русски, самый хороший командир.
The best commander, Maxim Viktorovich.
И, конечно, я
An
очень
excellent commander.
видно на землю.
And I'm certainly very happy to be back on Earth. This is very good. And it's nice, it'd be nice if it snowed,
Воздух холодный.
because the air is cold right now.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much.
Народу понравилось.
Wiseman hailing the exploits of his Soyuz commander, Max Sarayev, and perhaps a few words forthcoming from Alexander Gerst now.
Yes, I can. I need to ask the doctor. Has not landed just yet. That's fine. Let's go ahead. So number 3, please. So are you ready? Alexander, good morning. Good morning. Congratulations on successful landing. Thank you. Would you mind saying a few words about how the landing went? Went well? Nominal for us? For me? My first time in space. First time I got back from space. And it was good. I felt myself fine. Good. Great team with our leader, Max. Thank you for your support, of course. To everybody. Thank you and all the best. Thanks. Could you wave your hand for the mission control?
I'm not bad. Everything is amazingly heavy, and my head's a little busy, but overall not bad.
So comments from all 3 crew members, prompted by a member of the Search and Recovery Forces, Alexei Lukyanov, who asked all 3 crew members for their reaction to their on-time landing that went by the book as the Soyuz TMA 13M spacecraft touched down about 53 miles to the northeast of the town of Arkalyk. The crew will be
Time to move.
returning to the staging city of Untitled, Kazakhstan before long for further medical exams, and there they will split up, with Wiseman and Gerst boarding a NASA jet flying back to Scotland, where Gerst will be dropped off to be greeted by other European Space Agency personnel. That will be followed by Wiseman pressing ahead to fly back to Houston. Sorayev will be flying back to Star City, Russia, and his training base.
Видно? Здравствуйте, мы ваши земляки по Челябинской области, город Нижнеуральск. Приехали специально встретить вас. Очень рады, что лично удалось видеть. Скажите, пожалуйста, пару слов для...
Hello, we're from Chelyabinsk, your hometown. We've just come here for the purpose of seeing you, talking to you. Can you say something to your fellow countrymen? Well, what can I say? I'm really happy. I'm glad that the dreams have been fulfilled. That's the most important thing, that even most reckless adventures do.
A broad smile on the face of Reed Wiseman, who returned home today along with Max Sorayev and Alexander Gerst 5.5 months after leaving the planet. Wiseman conducted 2 spacewalks during his time on orbit. Record amount of research conducted by this crew along with their other crewmates on board the International Space Station.
I gotta go. Love you guys. And I'll talk to you soon.
Other helicopters are in the process of landing. One of them containing NASA Public Affairs Officer Dan Hewitt, who has been part of the NASA recovery team. We may be hearing from him shortly. Sorayev now being hoisted in his reclining chair to be brought into the nearby inflatable medical tent, where it has been determined that there will be time for other post-landing medical exams. The crew will have an opportunity now to get out of their Russian Sokol launch and entry suits into more comfortable clothing before they are brought back into respective helicopters to be flown back to Untitled, Kazakhstan, the staging city for today's landing operations.
Хорошо. Передам. Да вижу. Пока пускай будет фон. Фон тут, но уже.
And as you can see, Reed Wiseman being brought into the inflatable medical tent. And there's Alexander Gerst.
Говорю, значит, надо провести инструктаж.
Она вверх бьет все равно.
А?
Она выше идет.
Еще репортаж.
Она нет, она здесь ничего не...
Идет пока, да?
Картинка идет.
Are you still filming? Yes, the image is still going on.
Вот водитель, кто...
И с антенной вместе. Я вас посажу напротив антенны.
Ну вот стоять всегда неправильно.
In 23-degree weather, with patches of snow on the ground, you can see that the Soyuz was moved into an upright position, enabling RSC Energia personnel to begin removing some of the critical cargo that was brought back to Earth in the descent module. The crew is now back inside the medical tent. They'll be assisted out of their Sokol launch and entry suits This will take the better part of about 45 minutes to an hour before they are loaded back onto Russian Mi-8 helicopters, 3 of them, to be flown about 2 hours back to the staging city of Kustanay, Kazakhstan.
Подходите со второй камерой, рядом со второй камерой, со вторым Калининым. Каждый раз, я предупреждаю, каждый раз об этом говорю. Ну, я и готовлю.
This is Mission Control Houston. You're looking at the inflatable medical tent, which is just several yards away from the Soyuz descent module. Inside the medical tent, the 3 crew members who have returned home from space aboard the Soyuz TMA 13M spacecraft. And at the landing site is NASA Public Affairs Officer Dan Hewitt. Dan, greetings to you on what appears to be a frosty Monday morning in Kazakhstan. How are things at the landing site?
Well, hey, Rob, as you can see, it's already beginning to... Not so much here where I'm standing, but there's been quite a bit of snow in the country. We hit a bit of weather, as you probably heard about, on our way out here. The helos got a little delayed, and I myself actually just stepped down as they were carrying the crew in. But if anything, it's just another testament to the robustness of the Soyuz and the capabilities of all these search and recovery forces to get us out here safely today.
Give us a little word picture, if you can, Dan, about the flight down from Kustanay. We understand that you all were flying pretty low in altitude because of the fog and thick clouds.
Yeah, we had to stay low. There were some ceilings that they were worried about, and of course the freezing fog, as we've been talking about so much while we've been out here. It's one of the biggest concerns for these helicopters when they make the trip. There's a tendency for ice to build up. Temperatures drop too low, and there's too much precipitation. So we were flying pretty low on the way in, but honestly, clouds are pretty high right now. There's no fog. We were expecting some snow here at the landing zone, but no snow right now. Sounds like a lot of the harsher weather is staying quite a ways west of us, so we got pretty lucky today. It's going to get a little dicier as the days go on, but certainly an acceptable day for landing the vehicle down safely. The crew already inside a medical tent.
Dan, so if you can give us a glimpse now of the chronology of what the crew will be doing over the next few hours, the return trip, and how they will be dispositioned from this point on.
Yeah, sure thing. So right now they're in the medical tent. They're doing their initial checkouts. Reed Wiseman is going to be participating in, he's going to be the latest participant in a series of field test exercises that we've been doing with some of the crew members as soon as they get down on the ground. Those exercises looking at very basic things, having the astronauts stand up, basic gear functions, things like that may not sound like much, but when you're readapting to gravity after 6 months, the first couple of hours can be very vital, not only for these returning astronauts. That's going to be a very important data point for us as we send astronauts, men and women to Mars. We need to know how well they'll be able to function as soon as they hit gravity again once they get back down on the ground. So once we're done here in the medical tent, as you can see, we're moving pretty quickly, trying to get everybody out of the cold. We're going to load them into the choppers and head back on up to Kustanay. where we'll do the welcoming ceremony, depending on how the guys are feeling. And then they'll be heading back to home bases. Max Drive getting in the GCTC plane, heading back to Star City in Russia. And then Reed Wiseman and Alexander Gerst are going to get on the NASA plane and make their way back over to Houston. Alexander Gerst will actually be going straight back to his home base in Europe, though.
And Dan, looking at the cold weather that you're enduring at this moment makes my bones chill, since we'll be launching another trio of crew members in 2 weeks, and it only gets colder from here.
It does, and honestly, I think you went through a little bit colder when you were here back in March. The wind isn't too bad right now. If anything, it's just starting to wake everybody up a little bit more as we're standing here. But definitely a little cold. It's not Houston, but definitely bearable.
Sounds good, Dan. Well, we appreciate it very much. We're going to be getting some replays here, it appears, of the Soyuz in the final seconds of its descent for landing that we're looking at the moment. And here's our replay of landing. Let's keep you on the line here for just a second. And there were the soft landing engines firing just a second before touchdown. That occurred at 9:58 p.m. Central Time, not quite an hour ago. The crew was extracted within about 35 minutes, all looking hale and hearty. Dan, we thank you for your time. Have a safe trip back to Kustanai and then back to the United States. And thanks for participating and joining us, even though it was a bit late today.
Absolutely. Thanks for trying to get warm.
Please stay warm and fly safe back to Kustanai, Dan. Dan Hewitt, NASA Public Affairs Officer, joining us from the landing site northeast of Arkalyk, as he is standing right next to the Soyuz TMA 13M descent module, which brought Max Sarayev, Reed Wiseman, and Alexander Gerst home after 165 days in space. Now you're watching a replay of one of the all-terrain vehicles making its way from a nearby parked position at the landing zone to the spacecraft itself, just a few seconds after the Soyuz touchdown at 9:58 p.m. Central Time. The Soyuz landed and then tipped over onto its side, which is not uncommon, especially in heavy wind, dragged onto its side by the girth of its parachute. But the crew was extracted in rapid fashion, all placed in chairs nearby the spacecraft to allow themselves a few minutes to regain their equilibrium, and then were carried inside the inflatable medical tent, where they're now being attended to for routine post-landing medical exams prior to being loaded back onto their respective helicopters for about a 2-hour flight to the staging city in Kustanai in northern Kazakhstan. And there's a sight we don't typically see, the wind carrying the parachute and tipping the Soyuz over onto its side, but you can see how quickly the initial team of search and recovery personnel were at the scene to attend to the crew and their rapid extraction from the descent module. That is the only section of the 3-section Soyuz spacecraft that is brought home. With the crew inside, Max Sarayev was seated in the center seat of the Soyuz. To his left was Reed Wiseman, to his right, Alexander Gerst. And again, this is a live view now from the landing site. The Soyuz was placed back into an upright position. The stand with its ladder built around the Soyuz to enable technical personnel to begin extracting cargo from inside the Soyuz descent module. Up on the International Space Station, 3 crew members continue the uninterrupted continuous human presence that began with the arrival of the Expedition 1 crew back on November 2nd, 2000. Now more than 14 years of a continuous U.S. presence aboard the station, being maintained by the new Expedition 42 commander, Barry Wilmore of NASA, and his Russian crewmates, Alexander Samokhutyaev and Elena Surova of the Russian Federal Space Agency. Together, they will form a 3-person crew for the next 2 weeks until the next trio of residents will be launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which is well to the southwest of this landing site. That trio consisting of NASA flight engineer Terry Virts, Soyuz commander Anton Shkaplerov, and European Space Agency flight engineer Samantha Cristoforetti. Last week, they wrapped up all of their training preparations at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City outside of Moscow, and will be flying down to the launch site at the Baikonur Cosmodrome on Tuesday, on Veterans Day, to begin their final 2 weeks of pre-launch training. Their launch is scheduled on Sunday, November 23rd, U.S. time, at 3:01 p.m. Central Time, which will be 3:01 a.m. at the Baikonur Cosmodrome on Monday, November 24th, launching on a 4-orbit, 6-hour rendezvous to reach the International Space Station.
Right.
Alright, we'll make it quick. All right.
Thank you. Have a look if you got something because I didn't show well. So you actually got a picture too. Get some? Okay. Oops, sorry.
This is Mission Control Houston, half a world away on the barren steppe of Kazakhstan. You're looking at RSC Energia and Russian search and recovery personnel continuing to work around the descent module of the Soyuz TMA 13M spacecraft that brought home Reed Wiseman, Alexander Gerst, and Max Sarayev. They landed 1 hour ago, were quickly extracted from the spacecraft, placed on reclining chairs just by the capsule to enable themselves to regain their land legs after 165 days of weightlessness. They are now inside the nearby inflatable medical tent, attending for initial routine post-landing medical examinations that are always part of a Soyuz landing. Their Russian Sokol launch and entry suits by now have been removed. They'll be donning more comfortable clothing and warm clothing to ward off the 23-degree Fahrenheit weather outside before they are placed inside respective helicopters for about a 2-hour flight back to Kustanay, Kazakhstan, in northern Kazakhstan, just across the border from Russia, for a traditional Kazakh ceremony, and then to board both NASA and Russian aircraft to fly back to Europe first, where Alexander Gerst will be met by other European Space Agency personnel en route back to the European Astronaut Center. Reed Wiseman will press on to return to Houston, and Max Sarayev will be returning to Star City, Russia, to his training base. You can see part of the flotilla, the phalanx of Russian Mi-8 helicopters that are always part of a recovery operation in Kazakhstan. And once again, there is that inflatable medical tent in which the crew is currently undergoing those routine post-landing medical tests. Everything went by the book from the time the crew began its landing preparations on board the station on Sunday afternoon. The hatch closure, the undocking, the deorbit burn, their high-speed entry back into the Earth's atmosphere, culminating with an on-time touchdown at 9:58 p.m. Central Time, 9:58 a.m. Kazakhstan time on Monday morning.
Когда вынесут, да, Сереж, Тамонин, около палок караулит.
Еще один летит. Они тут подлетают, ёпрст. Вы что, успели подлететь? Мы вообще тоже не успели.
Не, мы...
Ну да.
Сюда.
And with post-landing activities ongoing in good fashion, despite the cold temperatures at the landing site, we can wrap it up for tonight's coverage of the return of the Expedition 41 crew. Once again, Reed Wiseman, the NASA flight engineer, Soyuz commander Max Sarayev, and Alexander Gerst of the European Space Agency safely home back on Earth after a journey of 70 million miles spanning 165 days in space. Everything continued per the timeline throughout the course of the day and this evening's activities. It was a bullseye touchdown for the Soyuz spacecraft landing about 53 miles to the northeast of Arkalyk, Kazakhstan. The crew now undergoing routine post-landing medical tests in their inflatable medical tent nearby their Soyuz descent module. Once again, the return of the crew to Kustanay, Kazakhstan, and then their respective return to their home bases will continue throughout the day on Monday, and that'll be our advertisement for our continuing coverage of space station activities on Monday morning at 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Space Station Live. We are now into Expedition 42 on board the International Space Station. The new commander, Barry Wilmore of NASA, and his two Russian crewmates, Alexander Samokhutyaev and Elena Surova, will act as a three-person crew for the next 2 weeks, conducting research and maintenance on board the orbital outpost as they await the arrival of 3 new residents who will be launched in 2 weeks from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. A multinational crew back on Earth and a bilateral crew on board the station, all part of the ongoing continuous human presence in space on board the International Space Station. So that'll wrap it up for this evening. Thank you for joining us throughout the course of the day and this evening's activities. Expedition 41, the 3 crew members safely back on Earth, having triumphantly completed 165 days in orbit. Have a good evening and have a good week from Mission Control in Houston.